Hey folks, thanks so much for being here. Just wanted to give you a quick heads up. What you're listening to is an episode from VJ Talks, my podcast. And this is a re-upload, so if you hear anything about, hey, go check out this link, go check out this forum, etc., it's more than likely not there anymore. So just wanted to give you that heads up before you went looking for something that wasn't there. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Please enjoy, and let me know what you think in the comments. Catch you later. Hello and welcome to VJ Talks, a bi-monthly podcast presented by VJH Creations LLC, where I talk about anything and everything to do with TTRPGs and sometimes larger pop culture. I want to give a quick shout out to Arcane Anthems providing the intro and outro music you hear in this podcast. Arcane Anthems creates free music for tabletop role-playing campaign streams and podcasts. Music adds immersion, tension, and emotion to role-playing games, but often streams and podcasts shy away from using music for fear of legal ramifications. Arcane Anthems wants to make it simple to add music to your games. Let's talk about Drow. So a quick history, in D&D 5e, elves were created by Corellon in their pantheon. At some point, the goddess Loth betrayed Corellon and the Drow that were following her were banished from Corellon's gaze. Loth and other banished gods started the Dark Elven pantheon, which Loth is the head of. So now you have Drow, who are these dark-skinned, Underdark-dwelling elves who live in a matriarchal society. They treat men like shit and they're slavers. The Drow skin tone is an issue. Now, it's typically black and purple and not the coloring you see on actual people of color, but when you look at the majority of art for high elves and wood elves, they all have pale skin. The skin tone we associate it with white people. In contrast, it isn't hard to draw a comparison to people of color, even though their skin is purple and black. They're the only standard dark-colored elves, and they're also evil. People have said in the past, well, not all Drow are evil. There's even the goddess Celestria who tries to reach out to the Drow that don't want to be a part of that life. Here's the thing. I know they think they're making an argument against what I'm saying by saying there are some good ones, but really all they're doing is reinforcing the fact that the whole concept around Drow was definitely pulled from real-world people of color. How many people of color have heard people say, oh, you're one of the good ones, when comparing them to other members of their racial group? The whole idea that there are some good ones is reinforcing what some might consider quote-unquote good racism, like you're a credit to your race, who's usually all bad. TikToker Starshine Evelyn said, in D&D 3, Drow were brown before they were cursed black. They were also from a desert and sometimes Arabic coded before the Underdark. This underscores my statement about there being racial coding with the Drow. I know another argument some people will make is, well, they were corrupted by a dark goddess. Okay, but here's the thing. They might have been corrupted, but they still have free will. They are still able to make decisions and choices on their own. Would I be okay if the lore was to say a sizable part of the population follows the dark goddess Loth? Sure. Am I okay with them saying it's the majority of them? Absolutely not. Even when you take magic into account, the betrayal of Loth and the corruption of the Dark Elves happened thousands of years ago. There is no way the majority of them would still be corrupted like this. It beggars belief. It doesn't make sense magically, logically, any of it. There is no reason for Drow at this point in canon to be evil like this, to have the majority of them be like this. It's bad storytelling. Let's talk about elves, the Drow, and their lifespan. Elves live roughly 750 years max. It's been roughly 31,000 years since Loth became Loth and everything that happened with the Drow. A typical elf claims adulthood at 100 years, but to be generous, let's say 150. There have been 206 generations of Drow since they were banished. Save for mind-altering magic, which to my understanding they aren't under, but just simply fear and manipulation, it makes no logical sense the majority of Drow are still evil in canon lore. Someone on Twitter also gave me a real-world breakdown on how this would make no fucking sense. @WhereOctopus explained to me a 41 generation breakdown. For comparison, 41 human generations ago, Harold Bluetooth converted Denmark to Christianity, with other Scandinavian kingdoms following suit. Today, only about 3% of Danes regularly attend church, and only 25% believe Jesus to be the Son of God. Given the real-world history, coupled with the fact that there's supposed to be a goddess in the dark elf pantheon that is supposed to be trying to bring them out of the darkness, I'm like, what the fuck have you been doing for 31,000 years? It doesn't make any sense storytelling-wise. It's bad storytelling, like I said before. It's not consistent. Also, given the fact in Forgotten Realms lore, if the gods lose followers, they lose powers, so who the fuck is still following Loth? Who wants to live like this? I get that the people she is directly bestowing power on want to maintain the status quo, but that isn't the lived experience of most Drow. Most aren't receiving any special blessing from her and are simply trying to exist. And yes, I know deserters are hunted down, but if some type of mass exodus happened, the likelihood of all of them being hunted down is slim to none. Next up, we're going to be talking about the orcs. So that brief segment covers my issues with the Drow, but again, let's focus on the lore and making it make actual sense. Arashni, my lover, my consort, you have betrayed me. You have betrayed us all. You have corrupted our son and daughter. I curse you. I turn you and all that is yours away. I banish you from the light and cast you into darkness eternal. May the twisted nature of your heart be shown over your dark beauty. And the moment after the curse passed Coralon's lips, Arashni's body grew to monstrous size and contorted. Her limbs grew long and divided, articulating at multiple points. The treacherous lover of Coralon had become a spider queen. But this transformation of her body and limbs were not the worst of the curse. While she maintained the dark beauty that it had enraptured, she was no longer able to hide the malice in her heart. All artifice was stripped away, and forever her face shone with hatred. After Coralon cursed Arashni for her treachery and trying to kill him, she was cast down into the demon web pits, where she would become the demon goddess Loth. Her son, Veyrun, and daughter Alestri were also cast out of the Seldarine pantheon and forced to wander the mortal realm, and the followers of Arashni, the Dark Elves, followed the fate of their goddess, cast from the light of Coralon and forced into the darkness deep beneath the land. Now, let's take a look at the article, D&D, Wizards of the Coast adds 3 new types of Drow, Retcon Drow lore by J.R. Zambrano from Bells of Lost Souls. Link will be in the description. With the summer of Dritz looming over us all, Wizards of the Coast has unveiled 3 new types of Drow, Uda Drow, Avon Drow, and Lauren Drow. The summer is all about Dritz at Dungeons & Dragons, and that means just one thing. It's an all-Drow party at the coast, where the wizards are right now, and in celebration of the legend of Dritz, Wizards of the Coast is revamping much of the lore surrounding the quote-unquote Dark Elves with the introduction of 3 new kinds of Drow. The reveal appeared on the website under a post entitled The Legend of Dritz, which showcases many of the Dritz-centric stories going on right now, including the upcoming Dark Alliance game, as well as a deep voice reimagining of Dritz's origin story voiced by none other than popular Sherlock actor Benedict Cumberbatch. Cumberbatch, who also voiced the Dragon Smaug in Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, regales us all with Dritz Do'Urden's terrible choice, remain in the underground cult of Lolth in which he was raised, and knows in his heart of evil, or rebel and be hunted by goddess and family alike. All of which kind of fits with this new lore recently established for Drow, but then they go a step further, inviting the reader to learn more about famous Drow locations in the Underdark. As you do, you'll learn of 3 different kinds of Drow, the Uda Drow, Avon Drow, and Lauren Drow. What are all of these, you might be wondering? Let's take a look. First up, the Uda Drow, whose stronghold is deep within the Underdark in the city of Menzoberranzan. This is now specifically labeled as the stronghold of the quote-unquote cult of Lolth, implying that not all Drow out there follow the Queen of Spiders. In fact, they are specifically labeled as a society that has become corrupted by Loth's teachings. Deep in the Underdark lies the city of Menzoberranzan, stronghold of the cult of Lolth. This Uda Drow society has become corrupted by the malicious goddess who teaches them to despise all outsiders. The subterranean city of spiders is the bastion of the Uda Drow, Drow elves who became tainted by Loth's insidious teachings. Uda Drow society values ruthlessness, obedience, and a burning hatred of surface dwellers. Menzoberranzan's young warriors raid surface villages, proving their worth by how many elves they destroy. It was once widely believed that all Drow elves lived below ground and worshipped Loth, but the truths that have long been buried are now beginning to come to light. And one of the truths that is coming to light are the Avon Drow, or Starlight Elves, Drow who rejected Loth, remaining true to their quote-unquote innate integrity and vanished into the north. Far to the north lies Caladay, an Avon Drow enclave built of glittering ice. Few recall its location, and even fewer know the secrets long guarded at its heart. Even as some of their kin followed Loth down to the Underdark, many Drow elves rejected her, remaining true to their innate integrity. One band ventured north, vanishing from history behind curtains of snow, aurora, and illusion. They became the Avon Drow, or Starlight Elves, a highly secretive clan steeped in powerful magics. The Avon Drow remain untainted by Lolth's influence, and life in Caladay is radically different from that of the oppressive Menzoberranzan. Yet, though many would rejoice to see it, almost no one, including the longest-lived elves, can quite remember its existence. But the frigid Northlands aren't the only place you'll find secretive, non-Lolth worshipping Drow. You might also travel far to the south, where the genteel Lauren Drow, or Green Shadow Elves, live a life of the kind environmental harmony that would give a Republican or coronary. The teeming southern jungles conceal the Drow elf city of Sekoloth, populated by the Lauren Drow, dwellers in the endless green. Head far enough south and one enters the territory of the Lauren Drow, or Green Shadow Elves. Far from the Spider Queen and her terrors, the Lauren Drow draw their wisdom from their environment, the generosity of earth, the mystery of sky, and the complex harmony of the forest. Their verdant city of Sakaloth, place of shade, and it winds between towering trees and chattering rivers. Even the most knowledgeable bard would be hard-pressed to sing its histories, and few northern adventurers have ever reached its borders. I like the concept behind it, but I don't like the execution. There's a clear connotation when we talk about Drow, right? There are these elves that were following Lolth, and when she got banished with her and wound up in the Underdark. They're now this underdwelling society. This new lore just completely departs from what we consider Drow, so I don't feel like they're actually Drow, just two additional elven subraces that were never actually associated with Drow. I think the lore would have been better served if all the Drow went to the Underdark, and then there was a schism and they all stayed in the Underdark. Let's fix it. The first thing we need to talk about is the three layers of the Underdark. There's the Upper Dark, Middle Dark, and Lower Dark. The Upper Dark extends from the surface to a depth of about 3 miles. Varied races inhabit this region, including Drow, Dwarves, Giants, all manner of goblinoids, orcs, swift Nerblins, and were-rats. Scouts from deeper races often venture into the Upper Dark in order to trade with or prey on the races native to this area. The Middle Dark lies between 3 and 10 miles beneath the surface of Faerun. Most larger cities of Drow and Durag are in the Middle Dark. Other inhabitants include Lone Aboleths, Cloakers, Darrows, Grimlocks, and Kuatoas. A few Mind Flayer outposts are scattered throughout this level as well. No place on Toril is as strange and dangerous as the Lower Dark. This level of the Underdark extends from 10 miles below the surface to unfathomable depths and features a degree of strangeness that would drive some surface dwellers insane. Few Upper Worlders ever descend to the Lower Dark, and few of the Lower Dark's denizens want anything to do with the surface world. Some of the creatures in the Lower Dark, intelligent or otherwise, aren't even aware of a surface world. Others have heard of it, but consider it a mythical place. All this information was found on realmshelp.net. Now, earlier in the episode, I read a little blurb which detailed how Loth fell and why the Drow were hers now, but I want to take you back to the beginning, to the start of the Drow, and through their history before being forced into the Underdark. The beginning. According to the Drow and Elves of Toril, Corellon made his then-wife Arashni keeper of the fate of Dark Elves. Unsatisfied with her position, she convinced her son Veyrun to help her and framed her daughter Elestri as an accomplice. She attempted to overthrow Corellon and started the War of the Seldarine. The war ended with Arashni being banished to the Demon Web Pits and being transformed into Loth, the Spider Queen. It would take her millennia to regain influence over the Dark Elves. Veyrun was exiled from Arvendor, a realm in the first layer of the outer plane of Aboria. Elestri chose to be exiled to bring light to those in need. The wizard Mordenkainen tells a different version of this story. The elves that would later become Drow chose Loth. Elves were accidentally created in the battle when Corellon's blood was spilled by Grumsh. Like Corellon, they were able to shape change. Corellon took favorites and made them deities. Among them, Loth was the most privileged. She saw what other races that were unable to change form could do, the marks they left on the world, and made the argument that elves could do something greater with their lives, have actual freedom if they forsake their shape-shifting abilities. Every elf agreed while Corellon watched and discussed, and eventually railed against Loth. He paused for a moment, considering an argument put forth. No one of his blood should be attacked, and Loth took that moment to strike. When Loth's betrayal was made public, many elves rallied against her, but some remained loyal. The latter became the Dark Elves, and Loth became a demon lord of the Abyss. Time of Dragons. In negative 27,000 DR, Dale Reckoning, the elves came to Toril in 3 racially distinct immigration waves through portals created by the Fae. The Fae were hoping these elves would erode the power of dragons who ruled the world at the time and were considered evil and malicious, even the metallic ones. However, Dark Elves, or the tribe Iltheri, part of the second wave and the most successful, didn't want to fight, so they made a deal with the dragons and carved out a piece of land where they would build their nation, Ilithir. Having forgotten Corellon and the Seldarine, elves who entered Toril worshipped Fae gods, and most Ilithiri worshipped Veyrun, the god of territory, and under careful leadership of his church, Ilithir grew in size and power, keeping their independence and keeping the dragons at bay. It was a bastion of elven civilization with evil permeating the society. The faith of Gonadar, the god of oozes, also gained influence to a smaller extent, and even smaller faith was that of Elestri, the goddess of dance. Her church opposed the evil machinations of her brother. And despite being founded by dark elves, Ilithir was a dark elf / moon elf society. According to Carnarlist, a dark elf Ilithir and archmage ruler of Atornash, dark elves, the number of dark elves was increasing due to the genetic dominance of their traits. The moon elf Kethrelia Armorilis, a devout follower of Corellon, accidentally drew Lot's attention to Torel in negative 24,400 DR, which led to the subsequent introduction of her faith in Ilithir. First flowering. After the time of dragons, the first flowering, or the golden age of the elves, began. First flowering, Ilithir. After the time of the dragons, several elven states were founded. Ilithir expanded its territory towards the east and south, and the relations between the dark elves and the newer states were peaceful in nature. This would change due to the influence of the Church of Lolth, and by negative 20,000 DR, the first skirmishes between Orishar, a moon elf nation, and Ilithir started. Due to Ilithir's expansionism, the Seldarine following elves opted to create a dark elf free haven. They decided to ignore historical warnings and cast the ritual known as the First Sundering in negative 17,600 DR. The intervention of their gods managed to reduce the collateral damage, but despite their efforts, the spell still had the disastrous effects of ripping apart the continent of Faerun. The ensuing casualties destroyed most of the Church of Faerun's membership. Faerun's efforts to bring Ilithar's citizens into his church once again were thwarted by the Church of Elistri. So Zorak Ozkovan, a priest of Faerun, claimed that Elistri expelled males and favored females, thus making herself more attractive to Faerun's female followers. This struggle granted Loth and Ganadar the opportunity to rise to prominence in Ilithir. Around negative 17,500 DR, Aelur, Sirapir, and Thurinatar, 3 different wild elf realms, opened a series of negotiations to unify all the elves of the Cedarwood. Ilithir, however, poisoned the 3 nations' relationship by assassinating their leaders and framing their heirs for the crime. This was the cause of the War of 3 Leaves between negative 17,100 DR and negative 16,800 DR. By the end of the conflict, the Ilithiri had reached their goal, and the 3 nations remained separate and so hostile to each other that they skirmished often. However, Ilithiri's plots was also eventually uncovered, and the 3 nations opened hostilities against the Dark Elves as well. First flowering. Mayeritar was a dark elf and wood elf realm founded by those who didn't agree with the sun elves from Arivandar in negative 18,800 DR, covering the area that became later known as the High Moor and the Misty Forest. Elistri's faith took a strong hold in the nation, which would grow into a flourishing center of art and magic, reaching its peak in negative 13,900 DR. The dark elven followers of Elistri wanted a part in the casting of the First Sundering, but weren't seen as equals by the others, especially by the Sun Elves, and the other subraces joined in, barring them from participating in the ritual. The Crown Wars. The Crown Wars were a series of conflicts fought by the elven nations that resulted in the end of the Golden Age of the Tel Quasir, which is the people in Elven. First Crown War, Mayeritar. The basis for the First Crown War was laid during the First Flowering Era in negative 14,700 DR, when the rulers of Arivandar, the Vaishan, learned about their blood relationship with the Myeritari ruling family, the Ulrithi. Using this as a pretext, they tried to annex and gain control over Myritar through the use of diplomacy. Myritar refused to give up on its independence, and by negative 13,200 DR, skirmishes and disruptions of trade between the 2 nations started by the Sun Elves became commonplace. In negative 2,000 DR, tired of the lack of results, the Aravandari organized a violent invasion of Myritar, which ended with the defeat of the latter in negative 11,800 DR. Resistance movements persisted for centuries, but were eventually quelled in negative 11,300 DR when Arivandar occupied the entirety of Miriatar and the nation was no more. While Ilifarn, a moon wild elf nation, declared neutrality regarding the conflict, many of its inhabitants accepted refugees from Miriatar and eventually came to openly condemn Arivandar's actions. Meanwhile, factions from the Ilithir sent help to the Miriatar in the name of their dark elf kinship. The help was initially unrequested, but accepted and further built up. Second Crown War. Ilithir. The Second Crown War started in negative 11,700 DR when the Ilithiri engaged for the occupation of Miriatar and the violence against the only other dark elven nation. open hostilities against Aravandar's allies in retaliation. They began with Orishar, a major trade partner and ally of Aravandar, and continues with God, this is so hard to pronounce these fuckers' things. Sorry, y'all. And continued with Siorpir against the latter. The Ilithari military made extensive use of fire, separating the region from its allies and burning down houses and forests alike. At some point around negative 11,500 DR, fearing an attack or even a genocidal campaign from Aravandar, Girildin Sethomir, the coronel of the Ilithar, summoned Wendani, a Baelor under lost control, and bought power from the demon, and therefore from Loth. The nation's nobility followed their royalty's example and bought power from other demonic patrons, coming to revel in the torture and war. By the Fourth Crown War, the whole future Dark Seldarine, minus Elistri, had been providing the Dark Elves similar help in the forms of fiendish magics and servants. With their newfound power in negative 11,450 DR, led by twisted and cruel individuals, Ilithir launched an attack against the Therantar and Elur, who had allied with each other and tried to invade Ilithir and stop its advancements with help, if minimal, from Keltomir and Chantel Othrir. By negative 11,400 DR, Ilthir was destroyed by fire and through treachery. In an act of appeasement, a number of wild elves joined forces with the Ilithiri against their own nation, believing that could help to restore peace. The survivors of Ilur were enslaved, and due to the genetic dominance of the Dark Elves, their descendants became Dark Elves over 1 or 2 generations. The wild elves who had supported the Ilithir were given the land of the Misty Vale, an untamed and dangerous jungle where the living products of Ilithiri's magical experiments were let loose. The jungle became a hiding spot for those elves who managed to escape Ilithir's slave farms. By negative 11,200 DR, Therantar was destroyed by Ilithir's enslaved monsters and undead. Witnessing the increasing corruption and cruelty of the Ilithiri army, even the generally peaceful Keltomir equipped themselves for war, and the two nations started to skirmish along their eastern and southern borders. During this time, peace with other nations wasn't achievable due to the warmongering activities of the adherents of Gondar and Loth. In fact, even internal peace in Ilithir was not fully achieved, for the Gondians were constantly at war with the other faiths. Ilithir's course of action earned the Dark Elves the title of Darrow, traitor in Elven, a word that would eventually become Drow, the term commonly used to describe the descendants of the Dark Elves. During these days, the Ilithiri were refining their worship of their gods. The early Ilithiri temples were often decorated with grossly wrong depictions of the Dark Seldarine, portraying them as spider deities subservient to Loth. For example, in one such temple, Elistri, goddess of song, was depicted as a spider singing praises to Loth. Gonadar, god of slime, as a spider with an oozy face. Kirnasali, goddess of undeath, as an undead spider, and Veyrun, whose titles included the Mass Lord, as a mass spider. With the exception of Elistri, it was known for sure that the offended gods killed their high priests who depicted them in such a way. Third Crown War and Dark Disaster, Mayeritar. Cranfahor's Door, the last remnant of Mayeritar. The Third Crown War, involving Aravandar and Chantel Othrir, was fought between negative 10,900 DR and negative 10,600 DR, and ended with the victory of the former. A century after the war ended, the Dark Disaster struck Mayeritar, destroying it and killing all citizens who had remained there. After the disaster, only a barren place known as the High Moor remained. Mayeritar had already been conquered by Aravandar at the time, and many citizens had already fled towards Ilifarn during the First Crown War for safety, although countless innocent Dark Elven lives were still lost to the Cataclysm. Among them were the vast majority of the followers of Elistri. Their death in the Dark Disaster, alongside the rise of Loth and Gondar, reduced Elistri into virtual powerlessness for millennia. Holy fuck. Sorry, just a pause. That literally answers where the fuck Elistri was. Oh my god. I should have done more research. I didn't know this. Okay, sorry, getting back on topic. Cranfahor's Door, a ruined ancient magic college, was the last remnant of Mayeritar. The Dark Disaster was caused by Aravandar, but the Sun Elves were careful to not leave evidence of any kind. According to the spirits in House Malarn's lore stone, the the Aravandari's genocidal intentions towards the Dark Elves were the reason behind the killing storms. However, the Vaishan pointed at the Mayeretar High Mages as the real culprits, accusing them of having tried to harness corrupt magic for resistance sake, accidentally destroying their country in the process. The reality was that most of those Elven High Mages had been murdered months before during an assassination campaign of the Sun Elves. The Crown War. Ilithir. The Fourth Crown War started as an Ilithiri retaliatory assault on Aravandar in negative 10,450 DR, supported by House Aelrith of Mayeretar. By negative 10,100 DR, riding enslaved dragons, they destroyed Chantel Othrier, which had been conquered by Aravandar. For the first time, the elves could see the corrupt power of entities like Gonadar openly in action, and overwhelmed, they prayed to their own gods for salvation. As a result, the Seldrine, or to be more precise, Corellon's magic, channeled through their clerics, turned all Dark Elves, including innocents, into Drow, changing their bodies and causing them to be harmed by sunlight. By that point, some Dark Elves had modified their bodies and were thus not further changed. According to Windanai, a Balar fiend of corruption, Corellon let his clerics channel his magic because he considered the Dark Elves too dangerous. The elves believed that the unjust punishment was collateral damage originated by their lack of a proper understanding of High Elven magic. In truth, it was all Aravandar's plan. The ritual itself had the goal to tie the Dark Elves of Ilithir and Mayeretar to the Faer's Res without discrimination, and to create a mental compulsion to enter the Underdark and remain there. After their transformation, over 2 months, the Drow were forcibly exiled in the Underdark by a coalition of elven armies in an event called the Descent of the Drow. After that, the Drow lived as nomads and scavengers for a time, but through the Call of Loth, they eventually managed to gather themselves and to found the cities of Telentawar and Galadirth in negative 9,600 DR. Over the following 5 centuries, the Drow kept attacking the Aravandari forces, preventing them from conquering Keltamir. The founding time. The Drow and Telentawar seized the Gold Dwarf Cavern of Byrenden for themselves around negative 9,000 DR. Galadirth destroyed the Dwarven nation of Alatoran in the First Spider War between negative 8,170 DR and negative 8,150 DR. The Second Spider War took place only 5 years later between negative 8,145 DR and 8,137 DR, when the forces of Galadirth were driven back from Alatoran by the other 8 nations of Shanatar. The region would be retaken by the Drow between negative 6,150 DR and negative 6,120 DR in the Third Spider War. Around negative 7,600 DR, the infighting among the Drow of Telentawar reached a critical level, leading to the destruction of their own cavern in a great magical explosion and forming the Great Rift. The homeless Drow then scattered, a time called the Scattering, in every direction but the south, spreading around in the Underdark and founding most Drow cities in the process, like Lorthdrer in negative 7,600, Shasamath beneath the Far Hills in negative 4,973 DR, Menzoberranzan in negative 3,917 DR, and Ched Nasad in negative 3,843 DR. So that's the history of the Drow up until being forced into the Underdark and creating the city of Menzoberranzan. Now, my version of things isn't different for the most part. The Uda Drow, Standard Dark Elves, Lauren Drow, Green Shadow Elves, and the Avon Drow, Starlight Elves, were all originally Uda Drow who were cast into the Underdark due to Aravandar's plan. Now, once they got into the Underdark and the people that would become the Lauren Drow realized they had to fight more because the rest of the Drow wanted to dominate these caverns, like they tried on the surface, they almost quote-unquote immediately broke away. I have immediately in quotation marks because immediately in an elven time span, so like a few decades passed. They didn't have the fight in them anymore. They dove deep into the Underdark, all the way to the Lower Dark in hopes of escaping the wrath of the other Drow, since they knew this would be seen as a betrayal. They made their way through the Upper Dark, losing many of their numbers when they came across a demon spider blocking the way to the lower levels. The spider wasn't defeated, but held at bay by brave warriors, while the others escaped deeper into the darkness. Once in the Middle Dark, it was a constant fight to find somewhere to rest their heads and be safe. They heard tales. There was an even deeper level, but there was no direct access. They settled down for a time in a forested cavern while scouts were sent out to figure out their next steps. They all turned up nothing. There's some discussion that maybe they should stay in the forest, but many agreed it was a bad idea because it wasn't far enough from the other Drow. Now, the forested area they had been staying in had been empty, save for, like creatures to hunt and whatnot, until one day a trio of green hags approached them, telling them it's their forest and they've been listening to them for a while now. They offered a deal. They could teach them how to navigate the darkness and get somewhere secure for a price. What the price was has been lost to time, but the hags taught them how to travel between the shadows. In other words, traveling through the Shadowfell and back out to a different location. The hags even helped them get to a place similar to where they were, since it was clear they felt an affinity for the forest. The remaining Lauren Drow teleported to this new location in the Lower Dark, which was a bioluminescent forest, and have resided there ever since. Their mastery of the Shadow Network has allowed them in the years to come to traverse the entire Dark. They've been known to visit the deep known trade city of Keldrell in the Upper Dark. Now, I know this sounds really condensed, but don't be mistaken. This happened over the course of at least a century to a century and a half. Now, after the Lauren Drow deserted, the rest of the Drow were too busy raging wars against other denizens of the Upper and Middle Dark to really go looking for them and each other. So for the next century, they tried taming the area they would call home. Eventually they did. They didn't necessarily come out 100% on top, but they did carve out a bunch of space for themselves and their people. Now, of course, came the infighting. This war is said to be even bloodier than the ones they fought against the other races. They were all vying for power and recognition from Loft and to be in charge of the cities they'd constructed. The only thing that put a stop to this war was a great magical explosion that brought down the roof of a cavern they had seized from the Duergar in the previous war. Yeah, I mentioned that in the little history before, right? Yeah, nice tie-in, right? Where the roof caved in was a small city, and it was seemingly crushed by debris. In all actuality, the darkness engulfed the city and transported it into the Lower Dark. That wasn't the only strange thing, though. Where the city was teleported, the ceiling looked as if it had opened up and the night sky was shining down. That wasn't the case, of course. Upon inspection using Levitate, it was clear the ceiling was still there. Unlike the Lauren Drow, who trained on how to navigate the darkness, the Avon Drow had no idea what they were doing. They were essentially stuck in this cavern. There were means to gather sustenance so they wouldn't starve. The nobility and clergy tried to recreate the society that they had been a part of before they were teleported, but the common Drow refused and overthrew them, while the driving forces behind the cruel behavior out of power, the remaining Drow set about becoming something new. They would never learn how to control the shadows like the Lauren Drow, but they would eventually learn to tell the signs of where the shadows might take them. And yeah, that's how I'd incorporate the Avon Drow and Lauren Drow into the history of the Drow to really make it feel like they were actually Drow and not just two distinct sub-races that really have nothing to do with what we conceptualize as Drow.